So my name is Florian Haarhaus. I've been with Box slightly longer than Chris, 6 months coming up to. Prior to that, I was at Salesforce for 4 years. Got acquired, sorry, not me personally, but the business I joined prior to that got acquired by Salesforce, which was also a SaaS leader in the digital marketing space. So I've got I've got three sort of market-leading SaaS companies behind me, and for all of those, I was in charge of or at least part of the channel or alliance business. And that's really what I want to talk to you about, right? Just to give you some of the sort of the lessons learned from that time. Hopefully some of that is relevant. Before I get started, how many of you who are either individual contributors or sales leaders are currently working with partners in your business? Just a show of hands. Yeah. Okay, about half of you. And look, and you're in good company, right? Because if you look at the industry leaders, be that sort of older legacy companies like SAP or even Microsoft, as well as some of the newer companies like Google, AWS, Salesforce, one of the things they all have in common is that they all scaled their business rapidly through a very rich and diverse ecosystem of partners. Now, the interesting thing is that they all did it quite differently. Right, so if you look at two of the fastest growing large SaaS companies, AWS and Salesforce, AWS, I recently found out, $6 billion of turnover across EMEA, $4 billion of that is done through two-tier distribution. I didn't know that. I thought that was pretty spectacular. Salesforce, completely other end of the scale, barely does anything indirectly, but 60% of its business is either co-sold or sourced by its services partners. Right? And so that really leads into my first lesson. I'm going to go through three sort of observations that I've made. And the first one is, know what it is you want your partners to do for you. Right? Because they do come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they can do all sorts of different things. Right? They can build your sales reach. They can help you get into other countries. They can enhance your products through better integrations or additions or add-ons. They can help you with the enablement. At Box, what we tend to do is we tend to slice and dice it by two dimensions, either reach or enhancements and differentiation. And we try and build an ecosystem that sort of roughly covers that sort of grid that you end up with. But it's got to be right for you. So that and it's actually a little bit to your first point, right? Know what it is that you want and be very clear about it. And for those of you that stuck up your hand earlier, if I asked you, what is it that you need your partners for? I'm sure you'd give me a very concise answer to that. But I bet you if I ask different people in your organization, those answers may differ. So I would also ask you to just really focus on making sure that you're very consistent, because if you're not, that leads to ambiguity and conflict and friction in the business, which you don't want to have. The other thing on that topic of just knowing what you want is I like to get quite granular on it and really understand what is it that we want these partners, either individual partners or partner sectors, to do for us in different stages of the sales cycle. Right, all the way from identifying a new opportunity to renewing or upselling that opportunity, because you'll find that different partners will have strengths in different phases of that sales cycle, and the better you are at identifying that and communicating to your internal sales leaders and salespeople as well as the partners themselves on what that expectation is, the better you can manage those partners and hold them accountable to that, as well as also map out what enablement they need in order to help you in those different phases. So that's really around knowing what it is that you want from the partner. The second thing is you need to understand how the partner makes money with you. And one of the things I learned at Salesforce the hard way was we were maniacal about really tracking how much business they were sourcing for us. Right? We didn't pay that much attention to what they were making with us. And then when we changed that, when we realized that that really wasn't leading to the right level of engagement or conversation, and we started to really track how is your, and really started asking the question, how is your Salesforce practice going? How big is it? And how fast is it growing year on year? And what can we do to help you grow that? That completely changed the completely changed the game. And as a result of that, we ended up having completely different levels of conversation. And we did really well out of it, because by helping them grow their business, we effectively grew our business, right? So that's super important, understanding, exactly how they make their money. It could be all sorts of different ways, right? In some cases, money isn't the most important thing. In some cases, it's all about growth in a new sector, getting exposure to a certain client base, getting exposure to a different country. But really know that and track to it. And then the third and final lesson, really, from my side, was try and take the friction out of it, right? For those of you who are working with partners, you may find it in some cases, or if you've done it in the past for larger organizations, that quite often it's fraught with friction and conflict, right? Because you've got direct versus indirect, you've got services being provided by the vendor versus services being provided by the SIs, whatever it is, or you're competing with your own ISVs, like Salesforce does with Viva, for instance, there are all sorts of areas for potential conflict. And quite frankly, given that the overall sort of implied channel contract is we're giving up leverage, so we're giving up control in exchange for leverage, there's always going to be a certain amount of conflict or friction, and we just have to deal with it and manage it, and that's part of your job. But we do need to minimize it as much as we can, because it does burn up unnecessary calories, and quite frankly, it's not good for culture either in the business. So 2 things that I've learned on how to do this. One, and this is really more aimed towards mature businesses, is really trying to find the swim lanes, right? It should be relatively straightforward, right? You say any company above, say, 2,000 employees, we sell to direct. Anything below, we do through distribution. Or we say anything in these 3 core countries, we do ourselves, versus everything outside of those countries, we go through a franchise model. Or we say, like Salesforce does, we sell everything direct and we partner on the services, for instance. And it doesn't really matter how you slice it and dice it. Companies like Microsoft, for instance, are very, very good at this. The more mature companies have really got this buttoned down. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for the smaller companies, because you tend to be more agile, things tend to change, certainly annually, sometimes quarterly, and your partner ecosystem is not going to keep up with that. For that scenario, I would recommend a second option, which is just have a channel neutral comp plan, right? Make sure you take out the inherent bias or conflict in your organization. So at Box, for instance, we have a very generous comp plan for our AEs, where no matter whether they sell something direct or indirect, the comp is the same, even if we have to give margin on it. And what that means is that actually the AEs, rather than fighting the channel, they're actually proactively coming to the channel organization saying, hey, we need more partners, we really need to help them scale the business, and it's a much healthier environment for that. So that's it, really. Those are sort of the top lessons from my side. They're fairly high level. If you need anything more detailed, catch me afterwards. I'm happy to discuss it ad nauseum, but I think that's enough. Okay? Thank you.